God speaks to people in dreams all throughout the Bible, at different times and for different reasons. But in Genesis chapter 28, God specifically speaks to Jacob in a dream. And I'm convinced there's a deeper reason why God meets Jacob in a dream at this specific moment in Jacob's life. But you need to understand what's going on before and after this story, or you might miss it. So does this story teach us anything about dreams in particular? And if so, does this give us wisdom for our own life in order to discern if God is speaking to us through a dream? Let's jump into the Word of God and find out. Here we are in Genesis 28, verse 10. Jacob has a dream. It's wonderful, but there's context we need to know. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, because he's being directed by his mommy and daddy to go there to find a wife, but also Jacob has lied and cheated his brother out of the blessing and the birthright, and his brother Esau is not having it. He wants to kill Jacob, and so his parents encourage Jacob to run away so that he doesn't die just like Cain killed Abel. And so what we have before the dream with Jacob, it's just important to understand, Esau saw Isaac had blessed Jacob. Okay, what does Esau see? Isaac blesses Jacob and sends him away. To do what? What is Jacob supposed to do? He's supposed to take a wife, right? And Jacob blessed, or rather Isaac blessed him and directed him. These seem to be combined. The blessing is within the direction. Do not take a wife from the Canaanite women. This is important to what Esau is going to decide, okay? Don't take a wife from the Canaanite women. Esau hears that, and he sees that he sent Jacob away, and Jacob obeyed his father and his mother and went to Padan Aram. So this is framed up as obedience, not just fleeing for his life, but Jacob is obeying the voice of his father. When Esau saw that the Canaanite women didn't please Isaac, because he already had 2 wives, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he already had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael. Ishmael is Abraham's other son. And then we have the story is back focused on to Jacob leaving Beersheba, going toward Haran, and Jacob himself is going to find a wife. Hopefully not from the Canaanites like Esau, but let's just think about those components as we navigate this story to make sense of what's happening. And he came to a certain place along the way between Beersheba and Haran. And what you need to know is that Jacob is in transition. Jacob is leaving what's familiar, what was normal and comfortable, his family, his land, where he's lived as a foreigner with his family. And he's transitioning into a new season of life, a new way of life, an entirely new place with a new set of obstacles and challenges that are waiting for him that aren't a murderous brother, but they're still hard. And he stays there that night in this place because the sun had set. So what is the actual setting of what's about to take place? It is nighttime. The sun has set. Jacob takes one of the stones of the place that he was in, and he puts it under his head. He treats it like a pillow, and he goes to sleep. And now we have God encountering Jacob in a dream. But remember, the backdrop of this dream is that Jacob's on a journey to go and find a wife, because now he's the one whom the promise is going to continue through. He's the one who has the blessing. He's the one who officially is going to carry on the torch from Isaac and continue that line. He's the one who has the birthright and blessing, and Esau's pretty mad, so he goes, well, Canaanite women didn't please my daddy. I'll get a different wife and add her to my other wives. So that's the backdrop of what is about to take place. Let's just see if we recognize any connections or any similar components. And he dreamed. And behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth. I just want to break down the different components of this dream. Okay. There is a ladder. It's on the earth, and it reaches to heaven. 3 things you really want to pay attention to is this ladder. Number 2, it's on the earth. And number 3, it's reaching to heaven, which resembles the story of the Tower of Babel, when the people come together in that place and they decide, let's build a tower with its top reaching to the heavens. And as they're trying to make their way, it's essentially them saying we'll get to God on our own terms or make God come down to us or whatever it is that they're trying to achieve. And God, brings confusion and messes with the languages and disperses them. This is just reminiscent of that. But instead of people climbing to God, it's as if God is actually coming down to people. And this is why I believe Jesus will reference this story in John's gospel to say, look, you're going to see angels ascending and descending on me. Then in John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the way back to the Father. I'm the bridge between heaven and earth. I'm the way you get to the Father. It's as if he's playing off this story, because what we're going to see is, behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on that ladder, which you're supposed to think, whoa, this is, in some sense, again, not to make it all new agey, but if you want to use the language of this is a portal between heaven and earth, this is sacred space. This is where God intersects our human world and our physical reality, and the ladder seems to be symbolic of God being present in this place, in this geographical location Jacob is sleeping in. And behold, the Lord stood above it. So we have a few different components. We have the angels of God. Why are they mentioned? Seemingly to note the fact that they're being commanded by God to go and do things, and they're tasked with different responsibilities, and God is in charge, but also the Lord is the one standing above, well, not just the ladder, but all of it, okay? And this is what the Lord says, and I want to pay attention to the different things that the Lord says here. I am the Lord, number one, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. So we have Abraham and Isaac being referenced. Why does Jacob need to know this? Because God has already encountered Abraham in his own way to say, I am the God who's going to bless you and your descendants. God has already appeared to Isaac in chapter 20-something to say, look, essentially, you are the new patriarch. Abraham is dead. You're the one I'm working with now. And now we have a similar thing happening to Jacob. It's as if the torch is being handed off, or the baton is being handed down to Jacob. From Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, God is making it clear that I, the God I was to them, I am to you. I'm going to treat you the way I treated Abraham and Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and your offspring. So what is God promising here in this dream to Jacob? He's promising land, and he's promising a lot of descendants to fill that land. Otherwise, what's the need for that land unless you're going to occupy it? Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. Okay? There's a few descriptions about this offspring I just want to note. They'll be numerous, like the dust of the earth. They will spread abroad, which seems to be another reference to the Tower of Babel or Genesis, when God commissions Adam and Eve, humanity, to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, spread abroad. Or the people at the Tower of Babel building that, constructing that, instead of filling the earth and spreading out to multiply and be fruitful, they seem to be working against God's ideal and conspiring to huddle up and make sure that they wouldn't be dispersed, and they end up being dispersed. So just a few tidbits in this story, references, I think will be helpful. Connections rather. And you shall spread abroad to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south, and in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So there's so many things happening here. The question becomes, why is it that God relays this information to Jacob in a dream? Could it be that Jacob was too busy to recognize or heed the voice of God when he's conscious, when he's awake in the daytime? Possibility. Could it be that God really has Jacob's attention in a different kind of way, and it carries a different sense of urgency when God visits him in a dream? Possibly. But the different components of this dream are really important. We have, again, God revealing himself. Okay, I am the Lord, number one. Number two, I'm the God of your fathers, Isaac and Abraham. So essentially, he's bringing Jacob into the fold and saying, you're a part of this covenant I made with him. The land, God promises land. He says, I'll give you offspring. Number four, they'll be as numerous as the dust of the earth. Number 6, they're going to spread abroad. Just look at the different components. Multiplication, filling the earth, having offspring, having land, okay? Spreading all the different locations, but also it's not just for them to have a holy huddle and be all about themselves as a nation. It's so that they would bless the families of the earth. God is essentially saying, Jacob, I'm using you as a vehicle of blessing, to deliver my blessing through you to the nations, to the families of the earth. So Jacob is becoming a part of God's global plan to redeem the nations. It's a high calling. It's a very high calling, okay? And so blessing seems to be at the peak of this. I don't know how you'd explain that. The culmination of this is blessing. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go. Why is that important? Because Jacob is running from Esau. He's in a land he's never been to before. He's absolutely exposed to the elements, and robbers and people can come and just raid his camp and kill him, and he's exposed to the wildlife, and there's so many things that he's exposed to. He's on his own. He's out there in a new land, journeying somewhere he's never been, left his family. Esau back home wants to kill him. And so God is reassuring him that in the midst of all that, I'm back to who God is. I'm going to highlight in green. I am with you. I will keep you, and I'll bring you back to this land. So 1, I am presently here. 2, I will continue to be with you. 3, you'll make it back here to this land. Whew. That's comforting for Jacob to know, so I'm not going to die out here. So I'm not going to die wherever I'm going because you said I'm going to make it back here. God is encouraging, reassuring Jacob, breathing hope into Jacob, giving him promises that he can look forward to, giving him expectation, giving him future insight into what's going to happen with his descendants. And this moment is very reminiscent. It's like history is repeating itself. Very reminiscent of how God met Abraham or how God met Isaac. Same components, same blessing, same covenant, same promises. It's just now extended to Jacob. So God is using a dream, speaking through a dream, to extend the covenant to Jacob, reassure him, affirm the blessing that's on his life, because Isaac said, you're blessed, and Jacob has the blessing. He stole the birthright, right? And God is essentially affirming that those things are actually true. That's a reality. It's not just a set of words you say to feel nice. No, that's actually, God is honoring that. And he says, I will not leave you until I've done what I've promised you. So promise seems to be the heartbeat of this dream. Promise for land, promise for protection, promise for blessing, promise for descendants, promises all over the place. And remember the backdrop of this whole moment. What's taking place behind the scenes? What just happened? Jacob lied. Jacob deceived. Jacob cheated. Jacob, is on the run, escaping for his life. And in the midst of that, God makes promises. God speaks life. God gives encouragement to a man that historically, up to this point, has done nothing necessarily admirable. And Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely, this is Jacob's response to this dream, and I think this is helpful in understanding what God is doing in this dream and what's really happening. Surely the Lord is in this place. And I did not know it. What does that mean? It means there's something about this place that is unique, sacred, holy, set apart, sanctified, and Jacob was just completely unaware. What does that mean? Well, Jacob's probably used to the idea that God meets Isaac, God meets even my grandfather, because Abraham was alive for 15 years of Jacob's life. Jacob is probably used to the fact that God meets us in those places where he told us to go, but I'm on the run back to the land he called Abraham, my grandfather, out of. So it's not that Jacob necessarily doubted God was in this place. He just didn't assume God would be there. It's not necessarily doubt. It's not a thought in his mind to consider that God would be in this place. But God goes, actually, no, this place is holy and sacred because heaven and earth are intersecting here because I'm present in this moment and in this place and time. Okay? So the whole conclusion of this dream for Jacob is not land, offspring. He's probably heard that over and over from his grandfather and his daddy. He's probably heard these promises and these blessings and all they have to look for. He's probably heard this. But for God to intervene in Jacob's life at this moment and say, this is for you and your descendants. Not to say Esau has no part in anything God is doing, but to say, Jacob, instead of using Esau to be the vehicle of blessing and eventually bring my son through, Jacob, I'm using you. I'm using you. I'm continuing the story with you. You're a part of this story that I've started with Abraham. Wow. And that's part of, I believe, the reason Jacob says, this place, the Lord is here. But Jacob's focus is not on the land and the blessings and the offspring and the promises and the families and we're going to bless the nations. That's not his focus. What really impresses him and amazes him is the fact that God is here. And I didn't know it. I didn't know it. The last person God visited in a dream was Abraham. And I just want to maintain connection to that moment. Let's not isolate this moment from that moment. The last time God met with a patriarch in a dream was Abraham. Something very similar happened. Abraham was in the midst of doubts and confusions and frustrations and questions and how will I inherit this land? How are we going to produce offspring? Eliezer? No. And God meets him in a dream. And in the midst of that, it actually says in verse 6 of chapter 15 that Abraham was declared righteous because of his faith. Before he has the dream, he's declared righteous. And then God meets him in a dream, makes the covenant. And now we see God meeting Jacob in a dream to extend the covenant. But I think the idea that God is present in this place, as if to extend relationship to Jacob and say, I do want relationship with you too. I want you to be a part of the story. That's a very similar idea to Abraham being declared righteous and having friendship with God in Genesis 15:6. Just so many similarities. And Jacob was afraid. So here's his response. I didn't know God was here. So what does God do in his dream? In the dream he gives to Jacob, he reveals his presence. He reveals his character. He reveals his hand in Jacob's life in that moment. Because I'm sure in that moment, running away, going somewhere you've never been, leaving your family and everything you've known, on your own, by the way, that probably didn't feel like God was in that. Or where I am on the way there, God is not here. And yet God actually says quite the contrary. I'm very present. So he reveals his presence. Not necessarily the blessing and favor and promises, his presence. Which really makes those things matter. It's the fact that God is near and has friendship with Jacob and is extending blessing to him through the main blessing being friendship. I'm present here. This place is holy. Heaven and earth are intersecting. And Jacob is afraid, and he said, how awesome is this place? Once again, this place is what's in focus. This place. This place is none other than what? The house of God. This is the gate of heaven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times in these two verses, we see a reference to the place Jacob is in. And I believe that has a direct correlation to why God encounters him in a dream, what God is doing. It's to set aside this space in time, this place in the world as sacred ground, because God has come and intervened and come into human history, stepped into the world of Jacob and said, I am present. The gate of heaven. Wow. The house of God. How does Jacob even have that terminology? How does he have that vocabulary? Because we don't have the temple, we don't have the tabernacle, we have altars being built, we have times where the patriarch call upon God's name, but the gate of heaven, the house of God, we have not seen this language yet, except the only real place we see so far in the story, anything remotely close to this, is actually the garden presence of God in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, which is, of course, far better than here at Bethel. But you're supposed to see almost like looking back there. And it's all, the whole story, leaving Eden as Adam and Eve sinned and they deal with consequences on their way into exile. The whole story is, the question that's hanging over it is, how does humanity get back into relationship with God, where we're in the garden presence of God once again? How does that happen? And here we have a glimpse of that. This place is the house of God, the gate of heaven. This place is amazing. The focus is on this location specifically. Hey, real quick, don't forget to head to abovereproachministry.com to check out all of our free resources. All of our Bible study courses, devotional studies, Bible study workshops, Bible study worksheets, all of my sermon notes, and more. And while you're there, grab a copy of my book, Fruitful, or snag some church merch. You can also find all these links in the video description below. I'm also very excited to announce Above Reproach Ministry discussion groups, or ARM discussion groups for short. Head to the website if you'd like to see what groups are available near you, or if you'd like to start one in your area, feel free to email me. The first season of video teachings have been compiled into a group study for you and other believers to dive into together. And in the months to come, I hope to have all 9 seasons of these video teachings compiled into group studies for y'all to dive into together. We hope this encourages you to meet and grow with other believers to dive into the scriptures as the body of Christ. Well, that is all I have for you. Let's jump back into the message. Now, early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar, right? He set that up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it, right? So let me highlight in blue anything relating to the stone. Remember that stone he put under his head? Well, he pours oil on the top of it as if to set it apart as different. This is sacred. This is holy. This is sanctified because of this place. So the idea of a stone being set up as a pillar of remembrance to mark this place as the gate of heaven, that's primarily where this dream moves Jacob. Jacob realizes the gravity, the seriousness, the holiness of this moment in time. And he called the name of that place Bethel, which we'll see throughout Israel's history come back into play quite a bit. Okay, Bethel. But the name of the city was Luz at the first, or Luz at the first. And then Jacob responds. I think this is important. As he gets to Laban and ends up marrying Leah and Rachel. Before we get there, Jacob makes a vow. Did God tell him to make a vow? Or is Jacob moved of his own free will to make this vow? I think he's moved by his own free will. He's moved by what just took place to make a vow and say, look, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear so that I come again to my Father's house in peace, then the Lord's going to be my God. And this stone which I've set up for a pillar will be God's house. Some have read that Jacob, this word if, means, well, Jacob's not convinced God's going to do what he says. Maybe. I don't know how the Hebrew actually is rendered grammatically, but I will say this, I'm convinced Jacob is not leaving room for God to not do what he says. Rather, Jacob is saying, since God is going to what? Be with me and keep me, and he's going to give me bread and clothing so that I come to my Father's house in peace, and if he's going to be my God, or I guess this is the then here's Jacob's decision. I've decided, since God has promised that, he'll be my God, and this stone will be God's house. This stone, which I've set up for a pillar, will be God's house. That is very interesting. And I've never noticed this before. This is why I love reading the text. I've always read this as Jacob saying, this place will be God's house. He says this stone in particular, the stone that he laid on for a pillow, he's setting it up as a pillar to represent how sacred this is and to memorialize this moment in his life and this place. He says this stone is God's house. Whereas up here, he said, how awesome is this place? This place is the house of God. Now, he's setting up this stone to not be representative of God's house, but to actually be the house of God. And I know, if you're thinking New Testament, Jesus, him being the true temple, the one who brings the Spirit of God into the world so that we can have access to God by the Spirit, the one who is the intersection between heaven and earth personified. And now we as the temple, collectively filled with the Spirit, we're the mobile temples of God. I know all of that should be going off for you. And I think that is helpful to think about. New Testament house, tabernacle, Solomon's temple, the second temple. And then we think, well, the temple got destroyed and the people of God are the temple now on the earth. And Jesus was the main and first ultimate temple, the presence of God in the earth. All of that does help us look at this properly and go, is that what I'm supposed to think? That Jacob is essentially saying that stone, just like Jesus will say, on this rock I'll build my church, and on the foundation of the apostles and prophets. I think all of that plays into this. But rather than like jump to New Testament, we'll stay localized here. And if all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. The result of this dream, I'll say this. The last time we saw someone give a tenth of something was Abraham giving Melchizedek a tenth of the spoils from the battle he just won. He willingly offers a tenth of the spoils. Not his income, not his livestock, a tenth of the spoils from battle. Gives it to Melchizedek as a free will offering, which seems to be representative of him like honoring God, because God honored him through Melchizedek. The last time we saw this happen was with Abraham. Okay? There's going to be a conversation in Hebrews about tithing in the house of God, and he's going to combine those ideas. I think that's helpful to know too. How in the Levitical system, with Israel set up as a theocracy, which means that God is king, and the temple functions as that sort of dwelling place for God, as if it's his throne room, the place where he dwells among his people, and the place from which he rules from, of course being heaven, but on the earth from the temple or tabernacle. There's a connection between the house of God and the tithe that Israel brings to Levi. And I wonder if we're supposed to see a connection to that here, or if that's just a coincidence. But the fact that Jacob sets this place up as a house of God, gives a tenth, I'm going to give you a tenth, God. That screams Levitical priesthood temple to me. And the Israelites giving a tenth of what they have to... I see all of that. But again, all of this is the result of what? A dream God gives to Jacob to make Jacob aware that he's in this place. So let's close with this. How does God use this dream? To reveal to Jacob he is in this place, he's in his life, his hand of favor and blessing is upon Jacob in the midst of all his scheming and lying and just all of that. God doesn't regard that when he chooses to bless, because it's based on the fact that God made a covenant with Abraham. And it's through faith, and we're made righteous and all that. But Jacob has a covenant with God out of God's gracious free will. Not because Jacob has earned it or deserved it, and Jacob responds to God's gracious gift and covenant with a free will offering and a declaration that this is the house of God. So just be thinking through this. And after this, Jacob's going to end up marrying Leah and his family's he's transitioning into a new season. So this moment in his life, this dream, marks a transition point, not just for Jacob in his life. He's on the run. Now he's going into having his own family and being cheated by Laban. He's going into a new season. But it also marks a transition in the patriarchal family and heritage of Abraham. The torch has been passed from Abraham to Isaac. And now, through this dream, God passes the torch to Jacob and says, you're the guy I'm working with now. You're the focus of the story. You're the one that I'm going to produce the offspring through and bless you and your offspring, and the promises apply to you. And what's interesting is in the midst of covenant being extended to Jacob, in the midst of blessing, we see land, we see Bethel, we see house of God, we see a tenth being given over, and I wonder if all these ideas are supposed to collide in our mind around this dream. Does this dream become the central focus that connects Bethel and God's presence and the promises and the offspring and the land and Jacob and those who have proximity to Abraham, and the tenth that's going to be given to the tribe of Levi later down the line? Are all these ideas supposed to collide in our mind through this dream? And my suspicion is the answer is yeah. The answer is yeah. I'm convinced it is. Could be wrong. But all of these components of this moment, this season, this dream, all the different elements of it seem to find their fulfillment and culmination in Jesus, being the true house of God, being the true blessing, being the true promise, being the true offspring, right? Being the true sacred space where heaven and earth unite, and Jesus has come from heaven into our world. That's why he says, I'm the one that angels ascend and descend on. He's referencing this story to say that what Jacob saw as the ladder, the way to the Father, the way that angels come down and up, and the one who commissions the angels to go and come, that's me. Jesus is going to say, that's me. I'm the way back to the Father. So I do believe we're supposed to see Jesus all over this. And what Bethel is going to end up being throughout Israel's story Bethel's origin story is here. And so anytime I see Bethel referenced, I should come back to this story to make sure I understand how it was set up, what it was set up to be: sacred space, the place where God met Jacob in the midst of frustration, confusion, doubts, fears, his own scheming and deception, getting him into trouble. God meets him. Covenant, land, sacred place, God's house, Bethel, and ultimately pointing us to Jesus. So God uses this dream to transition Jacob into a new season of life and to transition the patriarchal line of Abraham into the hands of Jacob. So that's today's dream. We'll explore another dream in the next Bible study walkthrough. Hey, I just want to thank you for all your support and prayers that make this ministry possible and help us to accomplish our mission. Your support makes it possible for us to create all the free resources we have available for anyone around the world. Our mission is to teach people how to read the Bible so they can live and teach the Bible themselves. So be sure to visit abovereproachministry.com for all these free resources and to support this ministry. And if you're a new believer, be sure to check out the new believer section on the homepage of our website and grab a copy of my book, Fruitful, while you're there. God bless you guys, and as always, keep moving towards Jesus.